Now that we have the sleeve in and we slid our post in, we need to secure our post so it can't spin, or else the arch will be able to spin. So I'm going to use self-tapping screws. It's hard to see in my black gloves, but it's a little screw and my cordless drill. Put the little plastic cap in, keep rain out of it, just like that. Then we check to see if the post is level. Pretty level in that direction. Let's check it in 2 directions. All right. It's level. What we're going to do now is install the fence onto the arches and posts. The first thing you do is start at a corner. And how you do that is you roll the fence past the post like we have right here. So you make sure that you have enough fence, because you're going to end up cutting this on an angle relative to the fence line. So the fence is going to have to meet back at the post to be able to attach it. The next thing you do is you go to the next post after you attach it to the tip of the arch with a small zip tie, one of the thinner ones included in your kit. Now at corners, the best thing to do, and you couldn't see it in the last shot very well, but the best thing you can do is leave 2 squares of fence past the tip of the arch. That way it doesn't draw the fence in at the corners, which will be evident when you see the fence up. On this side of the fence, we have 3 posts. One in the corner, one in the middle, and another corner. What we're going to do is cut the fence here, making sure that the fence will reach back to the pole when it curves around the arch. If you're not pushing the limit of your enclosure and trying to make it, 98 or 99 feet out of 100, it's always better to leave a little bit extra and cut it off at the end. It's better not to cut yourself short, because if it doesn't make it back to the pole, then you have to put a patch piece in. You must cut the fence at corners. If you try to walk the fence material around the corner, it won't work very well. It'll get all bunchy and be difficult. It's always better to cut it at a corner and restart. When you install this fence, always put up one section in completion at a time, one side. And when you do that, what you do is you attach the fence to the tips of the arches first. Then you go back to the middle post, or if it's an even number of posts close to the middle, one of the other middle ones. You lift the middle of the fence up straight. And then you attach a zip tie close to, but not on, where the pieces flatten where the spring is. Attach one zip tie by hand. Then you can move to the next pole, or in this case, one corner and then the other, and do the same thing. Now you go back to the middle and do the same thing for here and for here, and then repeat for the other two corners. Now when you do corners, you always try to use the cells to pull the fence a little tighter. Like I'm picking this particular spot because a little bit of pressure with my thumb and it'll pull very close to the arch. You put the zip tie on there and you tighten it. The next step, if you have it, it's always a good tool to have. Get out of my pocket. Is a zip tie tightening tool. Your next step will be to go and tighten these ties and cut them off. You can do the same thing with the pliers and a little cutter, like a wire cutter. It just takes a little more effort. We'll be fixing this little buckle later. The next step is to attach the fence to the poles with the larger zip ties. Usually you start either in the middle of a long run or at the corners of a short run. Long run being, several poles, the short one being like this, where there's just one in the middle. Now I've just attached to that corner, and I've walked over to this corner. As you can see, the fence is kind of buckled up on this corner, which means that the fence itself, the fence line, is gradually going uphill. So we're going to need to go to that post and adjust the fence by cinching it up, which I'll show you in a second, before we attach it to the pole. But before we can do that, we need to secure it to these poles, and that's why we started at the one corner, going to this corner, and then we're going to do that one, the middle pole. Now when you do this, when you're adjusting a pole somewhere in the fence line and you're attaching it to another pole as an anchor point, which is exactly what we're doing, you pull it a little tight, but you don't give it much tension because you're going to need to pull the slack out of the fence in the middle section. Now, as you can see, when we squeeze the fence cells together, it changes how the fence looks. And that's what we're going to be doing here with a zip tie. It's most attractive to do this right in front of a pole, as the pole will hide the work that we've done. A faster, easier way to do this adjusting with the fence is to use a hog ringer and rings. This is a hog ringer tool. Looks like a little gun. These are the hog rings. It's a set of staples that are connected with a ribbon. How you load it is you point the points up. You pull the slide back, the tensioning slide back. Slide the rings on, release that. And now you have a C-shaped staple loaded in the gun that you put around the two cells of fence and you squeeze it into a circle. That's how the hog ringer works. Sometimes it jams. Not a big deal. You just slide it back, free the jam, and it's ready to go. Now you can see the line of fence is greatly improved, how tight it is and how even it is. You can do the same thing for the arches. Gives the whole system a nice and neat appearance. After you do all those attachments, you go back and you zip tie it to the post. And always be sure to cut your zip ties off the little tabs, even if you don't have a tie tool, because it looks a lot nicer than having this sticking out. I've installed the next corner. You do it the same way you did the previous with the leaving extra fence. It's a little more trouble when there's already fence on the one side, but it's the only way to do it. And then what you do is once you've attached it, you trim it off the same way. You just have to pull it away from your other fence so you don't cut this one, the one that you've already installed, and you trim the excess off. Be careful to always leave enough so that the squares will be able to reach the arm to do the attachment with zip ties. The other thing you need to do is whenever you overlap the fence, you need to make sure you have enough ties to hold everything together so there's no gaps the cats can get through. You always put zip ties very close together on poles where there are where it's cut. It needs to be one in here that we need to put in. Now we're going to be installing the welded wire. As you can see, we already got it started a little bit. When you install it, some people like to roll it along the ground like this. I personally, since I have gloves on, I pick it up and it goes faster to just go like this. But you got to be careful not to cut your hand. The welded wire can be a little sharp on the inside. So if you do choose that method, just make sure that you're careful and have gloves on. The next step, and you can do this with the zip ties, I'm going to do it with the hog wringer because I have one and it's easier and faster, is to attach the welded wire to the plastic fence. Every other square. Every once in a while, make an attachment down here, maybe every foot or two, to keep that from just flapping around and gives it a neater appearance. One thing that's very important about the welded wire is to keep at least 2 to 3 squares worth of the welded wire on the ground surface. You can check that by just seeing, as you can see right here, we have 2 squares on the ground, laying flat on the ground. That's very, very important to the system. You have to have at least this much to be able to properly stake it. Once you finish installing one side of welded wire, what you should do is go back and put a zip tie very, very low on the sleeve to hold the welded wire in place. The reason for that is you want to be able to make a nice clean crease where the fence meets the ground. And how you do that is, between this point and that point, you're going to step on the bottom of the fence, but you're going to do it carefully and neatly, pulling it down very, very slightly on the fence to straighten out any kind of bubbles that may be happening. You're making as close to a 90-degree crease as you can. This will make it easier for lawn maintenance and for the staking process, as well as make it much, much neater looking once it's complete. These are our ground stakes. They were specifically designed so when they're hammered into the ground will fill back in along these flat spots, especially after the first rain, and make it very, very difficult to pull them out. Normally what you do is you put them every 2 feet approximately, and always put one at your corners. You can push them in the ground in a lot of places. Some places your ground is very hard and you can't. But you can, most places you can get them started by pushing them in the ground with your hand. You can even avoid rocks. You can actually feel them and move it a little bit. So you put them about every 2 feet. And you also want to alternate between the inside and the outside edge, like where the crease is, and out here, to help pin the outside edge of the fence to the ground. Because you don't want that to curl up over time. In fact, what will eventually happen is the grass will go back through here, and it'll actually become part. This will actually become part of the ground. If you're worried about lawn maintenance and things like weed whacking and mowing, you can pretty much run the mower right up against it. But if you do go and weed whack, you'll need to be careful and use a nylon cord and on a low speed so you don't break this welded wire. This welded wire is very strong, but the wire itself is thin so that you can bend it easier. We used to have a heavier gauge welded wire, and it turned out that people had a very hard time bending it and complained about it a lot. It was more expensive and a higher grade, but it was too difficult for people to use, so we switched to a slightly lighter grade, but you do need to be relatively careful with it with a weed whacker.